So everyone's got this opinion or another on the Nintendo Switch, and that's up to them. And I have my own opinion. First thing I want to say is that a lot of people have this very negative view of motion controls and IR sensors and rumble and this new rumble feature that they have. And some people have drawn the conclusion that that, as well as the capacitive touch screen of the Nintendo Switch, are driving up the price, and it probably is. However, there's another cost that a lot of people probably never even consider in terms of a cost to Nintendo compared to a potential loss of sales from that. And that is mental health. And you may be wondering, what do you mean? How does mental health have anything to do with these features? And some of you may be catching on. Some of you may not be. Well, let's get down to a very basic thing. Nintendo does two things: hardware development and software development. They make hardware and they make software. That's it. That's all they do. Well, that's their two main sources of revenue: game consoles and games, hardware and software. Now, the important thing to remember about software development is it is always software development. Even if it's done in a different way, it is still software development. Even if a lot of people think, hey, making games must be the most enjoyable thing in the world. Well, it kind of could be. That's the thing. It sometimes, I'm sure game developers enjoy it immensely. At other times, they're doing the nitty-gritty, dirty work of game development, of software development. They're going through, I have to make these classes, this database, all this other stuff like that. Databases, classes, methods, getters, setters, all that stuff is very much what they deal with. I have to design a UI. Oh, another UI. We have to make another physics engine. Oh, fun. We have to do all this stuff again. And to be honest, game development and software development are the same thing, because in both situations, you can want a lot of what people want, is a lot of what the client and customer want, is something very, very similar to something that exists already. They want something that uses a database. They want something that does this, that, and the other. They want web development's a good example. I want my website to do this, 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 and this, and a lot of them want exactly the same things. So when a web developer makes a website, they've made it again and again and again. And here's the thing: they can't necessarily just be like, oh, I'm going to use this old one that I've used before as a basis. And even if they can, there's still a certain rigmarole to it. They have to do a bunch of the same things over and over again. So part of why, I don't know if this is true or not, this is just my speculation. Part of why Nintendo, it's a good idea for them internally it's a good idea for them to include these odd features, is to add a little variety. Because if you've ever worked 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever, or 6 to 3 like I did, or was it 5 to 3, one of the two. Anyway, if you've ever worked 8 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, maybe 7 for some people, you know, it gets pretty samey, pretty boring if there's not variety. And you need variety to not lose your mind. And there is a degree of that for game developers, but a lot of people in game development wouldn't be the people being like, ooh, this idea, this idea, this idea. No, a lot of them would be doing the grunt work. Implement this, implement that, make sure that we've got all the classes set up right, make sure we've got this right, make sure this, that, the other. A lot of what they'd be doing would be very, very I'm not going to say basic, but samey. So, as much as that would be the case, they would always need a chance to have a little something different. It's not necessarily that you can't just make the same thing over and over and over again. You can. People have been doing it. People are still doing it. But it gets samey and samey and samey. And even though we complain about samey and samey and samey, we buy samey and samey and samey. Even though we complain about a lack of innovation, oh, Uncharted 4, it's the same as it, and it is. Maybe prettier, but it is the same as Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. The gameplay may be a little better, or worse, I don't know, I've never played, but essentially, it is the same game. There's actually, I don't think there's any new features, or at least not any incredibly new features. It's sort of the thing that people notice in other games, where it's like, no, it's so pretty, it's so immersive, it's like, but it's the exact same mechanics as the previous 3 games, and you're the same people who complain about a lack of innovation. It's a very sad but true fact. We are creatures of habit. We like to go back to familiar ground. Hell, that's why clones are so successful on mobile. Well, sort of so successful on mobile because it's very familiar. It's why we like to have genres like first-person shooter or, say, platformer. We instinctively know that, or not instinctively, but we know that, say, a first-person shooter is a first-person shooter. So it fits this mold, this idea that we have, these rules that we have, and those rules are important. It has to be in first person, and it has to have shooting. I mean, that is the broad definition, but there's a lot of other a lot of other things in our heads about how this should play. And if it doesn't, we don't necessarily latch onto it so well. And that's probably the key point. For all this stuff, what the consumer wants creates the problem for the developer. The software developers and probably game developers like new things. They do enjoy a challenge. They admittedly would get stressed because it might be a bit difficult, but doing the same thing over and over again just wears them out. It just wears you out when you're just doing the same thing over and over again. Hell, I've worked at a meat processing plant, and I know, and I have graduated with a Bachelor of Computer Science and majoring in software development. I know a thing or two about both doing the same thing over and over and over again, and a bit about software development. So what I'm trying to say is, while it's a great idea, while it may seem like a great idea from the consumer's standpoint to be like, oh, we want the same thing again, it's actually quite detrimental to the developer to be doing the same thing over and over and over again. Now, you may say Nintendo, or say Nintendo does the same thing over and over and over again. And now, especially like Mario does the same thing over and over and over again. Except the point is, from the point of a gamer, it may be true that you're just saving the princess over and over and over again. But from the point of the developer, you're doing a very different thing in Mario Galaxy than you are in 64 or any of the 2D Mario games. And they're different, that's the point. It's this different structure, it's this different mentality. The new Zelda is different from Zelda. It's got elements of the same, and it's got a lot of similarities, and it's got a lot of links back to old games, but the software, the actual development of it, is a whole different beast than other Zelda games. It has to be. Hell, they had to call in Monolith Soft to help them out. They actually had to call in one of this first-party studios and be like, hey, can you sort of like drop what you like, have some of your people drop what they're doing and come help us get this open world to work? Because they hadn't really done it that much before. And who better to go to than someone who's like, open world, we love open world. We went crazy with our open world and making it as open as possible. Slightly at the actually quite a bit at the detriment to other factors. But enough about Xenoblade Chronicles X, which has flaws and wonderful things, and many, many flaws and many wonderful things. But the point I'm trying to get at is, when you're in a job and doing the same thing over and over again, you want a bit of variety. Hell, do you know what was fun in working in the meatworks? Whenever a bull got loose, it was like, this is a bit of a different thing. And that's a potentially dangerous thing, actually, but it's different enough that it's interesting. And I say that in the... You don't actually want anyone to get hurt, but it's kind of brightens up the day. Or when, believe it or not, something slows down the day. It's kind of weird. But it's these different things, and for software developers, different is good. And honestly, for game developers, I'm not surprised if a lot of them take doing very eccentric things in the office, like, I don't know, having Nerf darts to shoot at each other when they're bored, or trying to think up things in weird ways. It kind of helps to not have a standard sit in the office, do work. You gotta do work sort of environment. Because that cubicle-based game development, or software development in general, is nasty. It's rough. When you're just focusing all of your attention on the thing that you're making, it can become quite difficult to actually figure out what to do next. It's like, I've got to do this, and this. I got to figure out how to do this. I got to figure out how to do this. And you get stuck quite often if you fall into that trap. A lot of what's helpful is having people to bounce ideas off, having people to communicate with, open conversation, discussion. Having people who understand something that you don't around really does help, especially when developing software. And having something interesting, having something you're actually interested in really does help. Because, okay, let me use an example. Let's use the Hello World example. I can make my computer spit out Hello World in any language I want, really. I just have to reconfigure a couple of things, and it's all the same. And all I'm doing is spitting out Hello World. I can make it appear on my screen. I can do it this way, that way, the other. I don't like to make it appear on my screen, but I prefer to make it do it just as a text in the dialog box. But hey, I can make a UI. Not a pretty one, because I'm not a UI designer or user experience designer. But I can make one. I can make a functional thing. And I can make all that sort of stuff. I can make function. I can make software that can do a couple of things. I can make a website. Not a pretty one again, but I can make a website that functions. And I can make all sorts of things. But the problem is when you're doing the same thing. When you're making the same game. Because believe it or not, a lot of Nintendo games are actually very different. Hell, if you think about how Kid Icarus Uprising plays, it's like, this is the weirdest, but quite a brilliant control scheme. And the whole thing is quite brilliant. Pikmin is like, Who would have thought to play RTS like this? And that's what it is, it's an RTS. Not a lot of people, really. And it goes on and on and on. So, the point is, this gimmick isn't about the consumer. Well, not entirely. And it's not about just holding on to a legacy. It's about having some extra variety. And Nintendo's development seem to have variety, but if you don't add even a little bit extra variety, it's not exactly helpful. Hell, you've probably heard about game developers having a lot of stress. One of the worst that I've heard about is the development of Final Fantasy XII. The teams working on Final Fantasy XII were under a heck ton of stress, so much so that they completely resented the team leader of that whole project. And he got pissed off enough with everyone else that he just left. Eventually, they decided to name the Super Boss after him because he was that much of a thing in their heads. And to be honest, after that game, Square was kind of burnt out. To be honest, if you look at what happened, and then you have the fact that Tetsuya Nomura basically has gone insane ever since the Lightning trilogy started, and he's fallen in love with his fictional creation, and he now insists that he's making games, but he isn't making anything. Because, I think Square's just put him on any project that they're not actually planning on bringing out in the next 20 years. Kingdom Hearts 3. But this is the sort of things that... And if you look at what people say about Konami, the working conditions are exactly what you want to avoid. The same and restrictive. Or what we've heard anyway. So you don't want to get to that point, to the point where everything is just too much stress on the developers because of too much of a routine that's never shaken up, not enough conversation, freedom, or anything like that, and in general not having anything challenging or interesting. That's some of the worst things that can happen to a software or game developer, is to not have something challenging or interesting. If you have something challenging or interesting going on, you can at least have epiphanies in the middle of the night and be like, oh yes, this great idea that I just had. I've got to talk to the guys at work about this in the morning. I'll jot it down. Or something like that. And it actually feels great when you overcome these challenges. That's probably the thing about game development and software development that's most rewarding. When you actually make something work the way you want it to, and it's just like, oh, beautiful. And yeah, it's a lot of... The thing that a lot of people don't get is it's a lot of work and a lot of stress. And you gotta be able to just take a step back at work and breathe. That's so important. And having something new and challenging actually benefits that. You may think, but they don't know it, it's complicated and it may create more stress. Yeah, it might. But at the same time, without that, it's the mediocre boringness creates more stress. It's like, what am I doing? What's the point of this? That starts to creep in, and it's like, and that becomes an even worse stress than having a challenge that you don't know what to do with, or anything like that. Anyway, the point is that I'm trying to make is that variety and this whole idea of gimmicks being bad, and let's get to another point, let's not get to another point, let me finish that, is actually variety not just for consumers, but developers as well. And it may not be the only point. They may want to hold on to some of their legacy and such with the Joy-Cons and all that and touch screens. But that's just saying, I'm just saying that this is something that does offer some benefit to developers. And developers who aren't stressed to hell will probably make better games. Just as a point, stress fucks people up. It really does. Hell, I'm looking for work right now and it's stressful. And it's can be soul crushing and kind of depressing. But as if I can just take a step back and relax, it gets better. That's important. I'm currently in a fairly secure situation where I'm not too rushed to find work, to be honest, but I'd like to. And, well, YouTube isn't doing it for me, so oh well. But that's the thing. Stress is the worst thing for software developers and anyone in general. Stress is terrible. Now, there's some other reasons why Nintendo may want to have all these features in their console, and they're not all just because, hey, Nintendo loves gimmicks, which they kind of do. They do kind of love their gimmicks or features. Now, the thing about a gimmick and a feature is it's actually a fine line. There's this fine line between, is it a gimmick or is it a feature? And to be honest, a lot of old games actually proudly said that their glitches were features. Yeah, this thing that's a glitch? No, that's a feature. And that was just one way of hiding the fact that they had a glitch. But if something's a feature, it's definitely different but very similar to a gimmick. After all, it uses a control stick. That's a gimmick? And some people might have called that a gimmick. On the Nintendo 64, they might have thought, this is a gimmick. What's with this gimmick? Just give me an 8-directional D-pad. That's way better than this stupid thumbstick shit. And that's really important. Because what a lot of people call a gimmick, what some people call a gimmick, some people call a feature. Now, it's a lot of what determines a gimmick and a feature is implementation. For instance, how well is this implemented? Is it implemented so well that it's like, oh my god, I love this? Or is it implemented so poorly that you're like, why is this here? And that's the question. Why is it here? That's the most important thing. So, motion controls. In some games, it's like, okay, this makes sense. You're trying to emulate physical movement with the controller as virtual movement. And to be honest, it didn't work too well, but it worked okay in some cases. Probably the best example is Skyward Sword, where it had almost one-to-one-ish motion control. It wasn't exactly accurate, and now virtual reality is trying to take over that one-to-one motion controls, which seems to be working okay in a lot of the cases, but has some things to work out. Some things. It's not terrible, but it's got a few hiccups. You know, as things do. Things have hiccups. So in some cases, this motion control was used very, very well. In other cases, it's like, why is this here? In some cases, it was used very little. In some cases, it wasn't used at all. Take Xenoblade Chronicles, for example. You never used motion controls in that game. Whether you were playing with the Wiimote and Nunchuck or just the Pro Control, the Wii Pro Controller or Classic Controller. I can't remember which it was. But it didn't matter. You just did what you wanted to do with the system. Actually, that's a bit of a weird way to put it, but it just didn't use it. So, you have this spectrum. You have doesn't use the feature, uses the feature but uses it poorly, or uses the feature and uses it well. Those are the three main points on the spectrum. And that's what determines whether it's a gimmick or not. Now, as far as I can tell, there's no proof of anything yet, but to be honest, gyro controls, fairly handy for aiming in video games, especially Legend of Zelda or something like that, where you go, okay, I'm gonna just go into my aim mode now and dunk. I've heard it's very good in Splatoon once you get used to it, though some people will still favor their non gyro controlled aiming, which is fine, but slower. And to be honest, some people, when they came to first person shooters, the Wii was apparently really good. Now, I haven't done much on the Wii, but if you could increase the quality of that aiming, yeah, that'd be good. That'd be great, actually. So, that's one of the things that you got to consider is how much of a feature is this, and how much of a, how should I put it? I'm looking for the right word here. I want to say, how much of a gimmick is it? I'd forgotten gimmick. Yeah, that's the word I forgot. Anyway, we have a spectrum, and some games they used, say, the 3DS. They used the 3D well. Others, it just made particle effects look pretty. Yeah, I'm talking about Fire Emblem Awakening, which made particle effects look pretty. Or you have games like Zelda, Legend of Zelda, Link Between Worlds, where the 3D actually helped you distinguish a lot in that top-down-ish perspective. It's like, okay, so that's down there, that's there, that's there, that's how deep this is, that's where this runs along, and all stuff. And it removed some parallax error. Others, it was just used, oh, that's a cool 3D optical illusion. But the rest of the time, it wasn't, a lot of the time, that the 3D wasn't very helpful. Now, 3D is not a great feature. It never has been, it probably never will be. It's kind of fun in a gimmicky, in a jokey sort of way. Not a great feature. Mostly a gimmick. Two screens, it's function. Not exactly a whole lot of function, but it's function. It allows you to do certain things. And it's not necessarily that it's I want to have two screens so I can look between them, look between them, up, down, up, down, up, down. But it can be kind of nice to have something here and something there. In certain cases, it worked better than others. For instance, it mostly worked well when it came to either the simple use of it as a map or an inventory. That's the best use of it, sadly. It's the most functional use of it. And that's not to say that there weren't others. There were uses like in Kid Icarus, where it was used as your aim. It was used for a touchscreen purpose, which was fairly interesting. Or, I'm trying to think of another game. Well, then Kid Icarus kind of took that from Metroid Prime Hunters, but improved on that a hell of a lot. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the second screen experience could be good, or it could be a gimmick. It could be a feature or a gimmick. And the difference between the DS and 3DS and the Wii U is that on the DS and 3DS, it was mostly used as a feature. I didn't really come across many games where it was just like, oh, it's a gimmick. It was either a feature, it is either what I classify as a feature, or not there. But on the Wii U, they tried to force the feature. more so than on the 3DS. And the problem with that is, if you try to force a feature where it doesn't fit, you wind up with a gimmick. And thus we got Star Fox 60, well, Star Fox Zero, or Splatoon wasn't bad, apparently. Apparently, I don't know. But a lot of other things, it's just like, you're forcing it now. And this caused problems with other companies as well, who felt that they needed to make it have a feature. Whereas they didn't need to. They could have just said, nah, we're not going to put anything on that screen. It may just be another display of what's going on there. But that's kind of the point. Now, I don't know whether you could classify what's in the Nintendo Switch yet. Is it going to be a feature or is it going to be a gimmick? It isn't either yet, and that's something that I think people are misinterpreting. Because to actually be one of them, we have to see how it works. And we've seen a little bit, and some of it gimmick, some of it feature. But in what I've seen so far, it mostly is feature and less so gimmick. So we'll see. Anyway, my name's been Akinoff. Hope you've enjoyed this talk on some of the more sensible reasons that they could be having these so-called gimmicks, or, as I think, potential features as part of the Nintendo Switch. Sanity, and a feature's a feature, not a gimmick. But it could potentially become gimmicky. So, have a good night or something like that anyway. See you next time.